This may look like your typical nature documentary footage of dolphins swimming around, eating fish, and generally being cute AF, but this video actually comes from a recent study that found that even dolphins are not safe from the effects of microplastics. Are plastics less than 5 millimeters in size that have become a major pollutant in our oceans. They come from larger pieces of plastic that degrade over time, or from things like microfibers in our clothes, which we're told not to flush down the toilet. And yet, despite all the warnings, people still do flush microfibers down the toilets. You probably shouldn't, because they end up in our water systems, and ultimately in our oceans, where they're basically impossible to get rid of. And while it might seem like a large plastic-eating whale is the most obvious creature that should be worried about, the truth is that microplastics affect animals of all sizes, including us. Let's go back to those poor dolphins. In the wild, dolphins eat a ton of different prey like fish, squid, and shrimp. But for purposes of the study, these dolphins were fed a diet consisting only of anchovies. The researchers wanted to make sure that the dolphins weren't getting any plastics from their food, because they know that fish often mistake microplastic particles floating in the water for food. So when the fish eat the particles, the dolphins that eat the fish then eat the particles too. That way, the researchers could isolate how the dolphins' bodies respond to microplastics without worrying about how their diet might also be affecting them. And what they found was that after just 4 weeks of regularly ingesting these plastic particles, the dolphins had accumulated more than 12,000 pieces of plastic in their bodies. Most of those were found in the dolphins' guts, but some had made their way to the circulatory system, and others were lodged in the dolphins' livers. Even worse, after digesting the same amount of plastic particles every day for those 4 weeks, the dolphins continued to have more and more plastic particles in their guts each week. That suggests that they're not breaking down the particles, nor getting rid of them through pooping. Instead, the particles just keep accumulating inside their bodies. Now, unfortunately, the study couldn't figure out why. The researchers suspected that the dolphins' guts were simply too acidic to allow for microbial digestion of the plastics. But unlike sea turtles, who can't digest plastic and just end up with guts full of indigestible material, the dolphins did break down some of the plastic particles. The researchers think this might be because the dolphins' guts are so good at extracting nutrients from their food that they accidentally suck up and digest some of the microplastics along with it. But ultimately, the dolphins' guts don't know the difference between a useful nutrient and a plastic particle, so they hold on to both. It's not clear what the long-term consequences of this will be for the dolphins, but it's probably not great. Microplastics have been shown to cause inflammation and oxidative stress in the livers of other animals, and this can impair organ function over time. Plus, once the plastics make it to places like the circulatory system, they can have an even more direct effect on the body. In salmon, for example, scientists have shown that microplastics can damage blood cells and reduce the fish's ability to transport oxygen. And while there's no evidence that the same thing happens in dolphins, it is possible that their blood could become less effective at delivering oxygen to the rest of their body. Now, even though this study specifically looked at dolphins, the authors say that it's likely a worst-case scenario for animals in general. After all, the dolphins ate 10 times more plastic per kilogram of body weight than most animals do. And the fact that the particles accumulated in their bodies even when they pooped them out suggests that they have a pretty universal experience for animals who eat plastic. As they write in the paper, if a top predator, such as a dolphin, accumulates plastics, one would expect lower trophic level organisms to accumulate higher concentrations. And yeah, I really hate to put a damper on things, but I've been doing this job for years now, and I can tell you that most of the time when scientists sound a warning about something happening to dolphins, it ends up applying to us humans, too. Dolphins are mammals, which means that, like us, they give birth to live babies, nurse them with milk, and regulate their body temperature internally. And maybe most importantly, they're also vertebrates, meaning that they have a backbone. So they share a lot more evolutionary history with us than they do with, say, a sponge or a jellyfish. And that means that whenever we learn something new about dolphins, it's a good idea to assume that we're next on the list to experience whatever it is. So while this study doesn't directly tell us anything about how microplastics affect humans, the fact that these omnivores living in coastal waters are eating up plastic from the ocean suggests that we should probably be worried about what it's doing to our own health. Our closest relative, chimpanzees, have already been shown to accumulate microplastics in their guts. So it's very possible that we will have similar results. And given that studies have already linked microplastics to things like an increased risk of cancer and reproductive issues, we definitely want to be cautious. But unfortunately, it's really hard to know what to do about this problem. It's already in our air, water, and soil. So the best strategy seems to be trying to stop the problem at its source by reducing our production and consumption of single-use plastics. If we could do that, it would not only help dolphins, but it would also reduce the risk of cancer and other illnesses caused by plastics. At least according to the Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health, a group of experts who published a report on ways to prevent illness and death from pollution in 2019. The problem is that the report also says that to do this, we would need unprecedented changes in policies and regulations regarding plastics. Now, this isn't science fiction. Several countries, including France and Rwanda, have already banned single-use plastics. But seeing as France is not exactly known for its hot sunny beaches, and Rwanda is a country in Africa with lots of poverty and little access to clean drinking water, you can see why it's hard to expect every country in the world to do the same. Plus, according to the report, going plastic-free isn't enough. We'd also need to find more sustainable alternatives to plastics like paper bags, glass, and metal. And this is easier said than done, since plastic is cheap and versatile and has a wide range of uses. Plus, there's the inconvenient reality that most of the plastic waste produced by rich countries is sent to poorer countries to be dealt with. So implementing bans wouldn't actually do much if those countries aren't on board. The report does acknowledge that it'll take time to solve this problem, but it insists that taking action to cut down on plastic use is essential. If we can't do that, then maybe the next best thing is to try and remove the plastics that are already in the environment. One recent study found that certain fungi can break down polystyrene, which is used to make plates, cups, and disposable food containers. And other fungi can break down PET, which is used in everything from clothing to water bottles. Right now, the process takes months, and it's unclear whether these fungi can handle the complex mix of plastics that are in the real world rather than the lab. But it's an interesting potential solution. There's even a startup called Sea Shepherd that's working on a way to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the infamous collection of floating plastic in the North Pacific Ocean. Their plan is to install machines on already existing cargo ships that will collect plastics as they pass by. Then the ships will deliver the debris to recycling facilities on land. Of course, it's not as simple as just collecting the plastic and throwing it away either. Plastics age in the sun until they become brittle and hard to work with, so they have to be ground up before recycling. And while this technology might help remove some of the plastic from the water, it won't do much if we continue to dump new plastics into the ocean at the same rate as we are now. Ultimately, cleaning up the mess might not even be the best way to protect animals like dolphins. A study published last year showed that wastewater treatment plants, which are designed to remove contaminants from domestic wastewater before it goes back into the environment, can also remove most microplastics from the water. So instead of finding ways to clean up the plastic that's already in the ocean, it might be better to focus on preventing more from getting in. And this is something that requires a change in our individual behaviors, like not flushing microfibers down the toilet. But it also requires bigger changes from companies and governments to limit the production and consumption of single-use plastics. If we don't do something soon, we could end up with a future where dolphins and other wildlife can't survive in the ocean. And honestly, that would kind of suck. This is one of the most important issues that we're facing today, and it affects all of us directly, whether or not we realize it. It has to do with plastic, specifically So what exactly are microplastics? Microplastics are pieces of plastic less than a sesame seed in size that have come from the breakdown of larger plastic items in the environment through weathering and UV exposure. What are these larger plastic items? Well, this can be anything from fishing nets and gear, plastic bags, bottles, clothing, food packaging, cigarette butts, balloons, straws, tires, paint chips, you name it. All plastics will eventually break down into these particles smaller than a sesame seed. Microplastics are everywhere now, seriously. We've found them in the deepest oceans, the highest mountains, and even in the air we breathe. As plastic breaks down, it gets taken over by microbes, turning into smaller and smaller particles. These tiny bits can get into living organisms and stick around, accumulating over time. Once inside, they can leak harmful chemicals like BPA, which messes with hormones, and phthalates, which can mess with reproductive organs. Plus, there are those pesky substances that just won't break down in the environment.